What kind of son calls his mother a burden? The words stabbed through the quiet of my evening, sharp and cold, as I stood in the laundry room with a half-folded towel in my hands. I'm Lena, a woman who spent decades stitching together a life from scraps of grief and grit, and the house I built in Asheville was supposed to be my anchor. A modest craftsman with a wide porch and an oak tree Paul would have loved. Caleb, my only son, was calling from Paris, his voice warm at first, checking in with the ease of routine. I tucked the phone against my shoulder, smiling despite the ache of years, asking about the Seine, the hotel, Melina's mood. But when he didn't hang up, when I heard the rustle of his coat and Melina's low laugh, the world tilted. "She's a burden," Caleb muttered, thinking I couldn't hear. "We'll guilt her into signing the deed." My breath caught, the dryer's hum a dull roar in my ears. They were plotting to take my home, the one I'd poured my life into after Paul's death. The betrayal wasn't just a knife, it was a mirror, showing me how much I'd given and how little it meant to them. The phone stayed pressed to my ear, my fingers trembling as I stood surrounded by clean laundry, the warm light of the room suddenly sterile. Melina's voice came next, casual but cutting. "It's technically hers for now." I could picture them at some Parisian cafe, sipping wine I'd indirectly paid for, planning to unravel the foundation I'd built for us. Grief, when it first arrives, moves like water, quiet, invasive, unstoppable. I was 42 when it drowned the life I knew. Paul's accident came out of nowhere, a car crash on a rain-slick road, leaving me with a teenage Caleb, a modest insurance payout, and a void no money could fill. The man at the insurance office called it a benefit, as if dollars could replace Paul's steady hands, or the way he made Caleb laugh on the worst days. I didn't touch the money for a year, too raw to think beyond survival. Then I found the house, a white-painted craftsman at the edge of Asheville, its creaking floors and sturdy soul a promise of something new. I made it ours with careful hands. I painted walls in soft blues, planted a garden under the oak, scoured thrift stores for furniture that felt like home. It was for Caleb, to give him a place to feel safe, to rebuild what death had stolen. I didn't date, didn't take vacations, didn't complain when my back ached from waitressing double shifts. I worked 2 jobs most years, 3 in the summers when Caleb needed camp or books or braces. Mothering was my love story, I told myself, and it was enough. When Caleb got into Columbia, I cried in the diner parking lot, not just for his scholarship, but for the cost I'd cover by selling my grandmother's ring and dipping into the insurance. "Don't worry about anything," I told him. "Just study." He promised he'd never forget what I'd done. I believed him. Now, standing in the laundry room, those promises felt like ghosts. The conversation I'd overheard wasn't a mistake. It was a plan. Caleb's voice again. "Guilt works every time." My hand tightened on the towel, folding it slowly, mechanically, as if moving could keep me from breaking. I didn't hang up. I couldn't. Melina's laugh came again, sharp and careless. "We'll take the master bedroom when we get back. She barely does anything anymore." The blood drained from my face, leaving me cold in the warm room. They weren't just after the house, they were rewriting my place in it, shrinking me to fit their needs. I thought of the years I'd carried the mortgage alone, the holidays I'd worked through, the small joys I'd shelved for Caleb's future. And yet, a part of me wasn't surprised. That was the worst of it. The quiet part of my heart that had always known love could be a ledger. And I was in debt to their version of it. I walked to my room, my steps heavy on the hardwood I'd polished myself, and pulled the fireproof box from under my bed. The deed was inside, crisp and undeniable, my name alone on the title. I held it like a shield, my thumb tracing the edges. This house was mine, paid for with years of sweat and sacrifice, but they saw it as theirs to claim. I sat on the edge of the bed, the phone still in my hand, and pressed record. I didn't know why yet, only that I needed proof. Proof that I wasn't imagining the betrayal. Proof that the boy I'd raised was someone I no longer knew. The recording captured their voices, clear and cruel, plotting to use my love against me. I saved it, my heart pounding, and stared at the ceiling. Sleep wouldn't come. The house, once a refuge, felt like a cage closing in. Outside, the oak tree's branches tapped the window, a rhythm Paul used to call the heartbeat of the house. I thought of him, of the life we'd planned here, of the boy who used to run through these rooms laughing, That boy was gone, replaced by a man who saw me as an obstacle. I didn't cry, not yet. Instead, I let the anger settle, a quiet ember that didn't burn but glowed, steady and sure. I wouldn't let them take what I'd built. I wouldn't let them decide my worth. Tomorrow I'd call Joanna. Tomorrow I'd start fighting back. For now, I listened to the house breathe, its walls holding every memory I'd poured into them, and I wondered how much of myself I'd already lost to keep them standing. How do you measure a life's worth when the hands you raised turn against you? The question lingered as I sat on my bed, the fireproof box still open, the deed's weight anchoring me to a past I couldn't escape. Paul's death had been the first fracture, a car spinning out on a wet road, leaving me with Caleb, barely 15, and a grief that clung like damp air. The insurance money sat untouched for a year, a cruel substitute for his quiet strength, his knack for making Caleb giggle over burnt pancakes. When I finally moved, it was for the house, a craftsman in Asheville with old bones and a porch that caught the morning light. I chose it because Paul would have lingered there, coffee in hand, watching the oak trees sway. I made it ours, painting walls in soft blues, sanding floors until my hands blistered, turning a hollow space into a home. It was for Caleb, to give him roots when everything else had been uprooted. I didn't date, didn't dream of anything beyond keeping us afloat. 2 jobs most years. Waitressing, cleaning offices, sometimes tutoring on weekends. Summers meant a third, picking up shifts at a gas station when Caleb needed braces or camp fees. My back ached, my knees creaked, but I told myself it was enough. Mothering was my purpose, my love story written in late-night laundry and skipped vacations. When Caleb got into Columbia, I sold my grandmother's ring to cover what the scholarship didn't, took overnight shifts, dipped into the insurance. Just study, I told him, my voice steady in the diner parking lot where I cried after he left. He hugged me, promised he'd remember. I believed him, clung to that promise like a lifeline through the long years of solitude. Now that promise felt like ash. The recorded voices from last night's call echoed in my head, Caleb's sharp tone, Melina's careless laugh. "She's a burden," he'd said, as if my sacrifices were a debt he could collect. I thought of the mortgage I'd carried alone, the Christmases I'd worked while others opened gifts, the back pain I ignored to keep the lights on. I'd reshaped our lives around Paul's absence, pouring myself into this house to give Caleb a foundation. Every wall held a memory, the birthday parties in the living room, Paul's handprints in the garden concrete, the nights I stayed up sewing patches onto Caleb's jeans. I'd given everything, shelved my own joys to ensure his, and yet, here I was, reduced to a line item in their plan. I stood, walked to the kitchen, and set the kettle on. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that amplifies memory. I saw Caleb at 5, chasing fireflies in the yard, Paul laughing as he scooped him up. I saw myself at 30, signing the mortgage papers, my hands shaking but proud. Those moments felt stolen now, tainted by the realization that Caleb didn't see them. Or me. A new memory surfaced, one I'd buried. The day he came home from college, his first summer back, and casually called the house ours. I'd smiled, thinking it was just phrasing, a slip of the tongue. But it wasn't. It was the first grain of sand in an erosion I hadn't noticed until now. The kettle whistled, pulling me back. I poured tea I wouldn't drink, my hands moving on instinct. I thought of Melina, her arrival after Caleb's graduation, their temporary stay that stretched into months. They'd lost jobs, they said. Rent was too high. I gave them the upstairs, repainted the guest room in pale gray because Melina liked it. I didn't protest when she changed the curtains, or when Caleb rerouted the mail to their names. I told myself it was family, a chance to fill the house with life again. I was tired of eating alone, of the silence that settled after Paul was gone. But their presence wasn't warmth, it was a slow claiming, a redefinition of my space. I sipped the tea, cold already, and stared at the kitchen table where I'd once helped Caleb with algebra. The recording still burned in my pocket, a weight heavier than the deed. I replayed it in my mind, not needing the phone. She'll give in if we remind her how much she owes us. The cruelty wasn't just in the words but in how easily they said them, as if my life was a ledger they could balance. I wasn't just a mother to them now, I was an obstacle, a means to an end. The house, my house, was the prize, but it was more than that. It was the life I'd built, the proof I'd survived. And they wanted to take it, not with force, but with guilt, the one weapon they knew I'd always bend to. It didn't happen all at once. If it had, I might have stopped it. But erosion is quiet. It wears you down grain by grain until one day you look around and realize the shoreline is gone. Caleb and Melina moved back after his graduation, citing a layoff and high rent. It was temporary, they said, just until they got on their feet. I didn't hesitate. I cleared the upstairs for them, repainted the guest room in pale gray because Melina mentioned she liked it. I smiled when she hugged me, her arms tight, as if we were building something together. But that was the first shift, subtle as a shadow lengthening at dusk. They started calling it our house about 3 months in. At first, I thought it was careless phrasing, a slip from shared living. We should do something about the porch, Melina would say over breakfast, her voice light. Or we've been thinking about a new stove. Caleb would nod, his eyes on his phone, as if it were already decided. When he offered to handle the bills, easier if it's all automated, he said. I told myself it was kindness, a grown son sharing the load. I didn't question why the electric statements went to his email or why the gas company started addressing me as Mrs. Hargrave Jr. instead of Lena. I just nodded, grateful for the help, unwilling to make a fuss over what felt like progress. Melina painted the hallway one weekend while I was at church. I came home to the soft blue I'd chosen years ago gone, replaced by a sterile cream that matched their sleek furniture upstairs. I stood there, blinking in the fresh light, the smell of paint sharp in my nose. It needed freshening up, she said cheerfully, wiping her hands on a rag. She hugged me from behind, her chin on my shoulder. We're building something beautiful here. I nodded, swallowed the unease, and let her believe I agreed. What harm was there in a coat of paint? It was just a wall, not a war. But deep down, I felt the first crack, the sense that my choices were being overwritten, one brushstroke at a time. Then came the nursery talk. Melina sat across from me at the kitchen table, one hand on her mug, the other resting on her belly, though she wasn't showing yet. We've been thinking, she said, her smile warm but calculated. If this works out, we'd love to turn your room into the nursery. You'd still have the guest room, of course. It's cozier. Caleb didn't look up from scrolling on his phone, as if the idea were mundane, already settled. My room, the one with the big windows Paul had sealed against drafts, the space where I'd grieved and dreamed and rebuilt. That night, I lay awake in it, the wind rattling the panes, and realized how small I'd become. Every corner whispered someone else's name now. I reached for the drawer beside my bed, pulled out the letter Caleb had written from college. I'll always take care of you, Mom. I folded it neatly, set it beside the deed I'd glanced at last night. The words mocked me, a promise turned hollow. I told myself not to replay the recording again. I'd heard enough. But that small, wounded part insisted, pressing play in the dark. Caleb's voice crackled. She'll give in if we remind her how much she owes us. Melina's laugh. Just mention the college loans and that she hasn't paid rent since we moved in. I paused it, my thumb hovering. I hadn't paid rent in my own home? The absurdity stung. Play again. She's emotionally dependent. We don't have to be cruel. Just make her feel like we're her only family. More rustling, clinking glasses. Once we're on the deed, we can renovate properly. I stopped it, closed my eyes, let the silence press in. They'd been in Paris, dining on my dime, scheming to edge me out. The master bedroom comment hit hardest. It makes no sense for her to have the largest room when she barely does anything anymore. Barely does anything. The jobs, the mortgage, the endless giving. I'd done everything. I saved the recording again, my resolve hardening. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table in the dark, hands around a cold mug, the house echoing my sacrifices. Birthday cakes baked here, Paul's garden tools in the shed, clean clothes folded for school mornings. I'd given it all, and it wasn't enough to shield me from their greed. By morning, certainty settled, not peace, but a quiet steel. I wouldn't beg for scraps in my home. I'd act before the erosion took everything. I picked up the phone, dialed Joanna. She didn't ask questions, just said to come in. As I drove, the oak tree blurred in my rear view, a sentinel to the life I was about to reclaim. Joanna didn't ask why I showed up unannounced at her office that morning. She just waved me in, shut the door, and poured coffee into the chipped mug she always kept on the corner of her desk. "You look like someone who's come to set something straight," she said, her voice steady as ever. I slid the deed across the desk. "Can you confirm I still hold sole ownership?" She picked it up, scanned it with her usual efficiency, then nodded. "No co-signers, no liens, no additions. The house is entirely in your name, Lena." That was all I needed to hear. I told her what I'd overheard. Not every word, just enough to paint the picture. Her face didn't change much, but her eyes hardened, a flicker of the friend who'd known me through weddings and funerals. Joanna had danced at mine, held my hand at Paul's, and now she reached for her legal pad without a word, starting to write. Over the next hour, we mapped it out. Legal protections first. A will update to lock in my assets, a power of attorney limited to emergencies, contingencies for if they pushed back with claims of undue influence or shared residency. She jotted notes on eviction processes, though I wasn't sure I'd go that far. Not yet. "Possession is 9/10 of the law," she said, echoing the words from the recording that still chilled me. We talked timelines, how quickly I could sell without raising flags, how to handle the proceeds through a trust to keep them out of reach. I didn't cry, didn't raise my voice. I signed what needed signing, made copies, and thanked her on my way out. Driving back, the Asheville streets felt different, less like home, and more like a map I needed to redraw. By afternoon, I had a private meeting scheduled with a realtor 2 towns over. Marcus had worked with me once before on an estate case. Discreet, professional, no nonsense. When I told him I needed a quiet sale and a fast turnaround, he didn't flinch. "We'll price it to move. I know a few buyers who'd jump at a craftsman like yours." We walked through comps on his laptop, settling on a figure that stung but was fair. He promised to keep it off the main listings, handle showings while they were still in Paris. I nodded, my mind already packing. Back home I started cataloging. What was mine went into boxes. Photos from the mantle, linens I'd sewn, the worn leather chair Paul had loved, books collected over decades. Caleb's things, clothes, gadgets, Melina's knickknacks, got marked clearly and loaded into a moving truck I arranged myself. I prepaid a storage unit, left the code with Joanna in case they came looking too soon. I didn't tell anyone I was leaving. No dramatic announcements, no tearful goodbyes to neighbors. I found a furnished rental in Charlottesville online, a simple place with light floors and neutral walls that held no echoes of the past. It was far enough to breathe, close enough if I needed Joanna. As I packed the last box, the recording tugged at me again. I sat on the stripped bed, pressed play one more time. Caleb's voice. "She doesn't even realize how close we are to taking over everything. Melina, if she pushes back, remind her about retirement homes, healthcare. The woman's not getting younger." Their laugh, light as if discussing weather, twisted my gut. "Possession is 9/10, she'd said. I hit stop, saved it anew. Proof. Not just for lawyers, but for me, a reminder that love could curdle into calculation. The house felt emptier already, its rooms stripped of the layers I'd added. I walked through them, fingers trailing walls I'd painted, floors I'd scrubbed, memories flooded. Caleb's first steps in the hallway, Paul fixing the leaky faucet with a grin, but newer ones overlaid them. Melina's cream paint, Caleb's automated bills, the nursery suggestion that had shrunk my world. Erosion, grain by grain. I'd let it happen, mistaking control for care, silence for peace. No more. I sealed the final box, loaded it into my car. The oak tree outside stood sentinel, its leaves rustling in the breeze. Paul would have understood this choice, I thought. He'd always said a home was what you carried inside, not the walls around you. That evening, I sat in the kitchen one last time, the counters bare, and wrote the note. Short, sharp, surprise, a burden did this. I placed it where they'd see it, keys beside. Locking the door from inside, I exited through the garage, the engine's hum a new beginning. As I drove, the town blurred like rain on a window, the road ahead opening wide. They'd return soon. Find locks changed, belongings gone. Let them rage. I'd already won by walking away. The drive to Charlottesville stretched like a ribbon unwinding, the Blue Ridge Mountains blurring into soft greens and grays as I left Asheville behind. My car was packed with boxes of essentials. The photos, the linens, Paul's chair strapped to the roof like a sentinel from another life. I didn't look back at the oak tree or the porch. They were memories now, not anchors. The rental appeared sooner than expected, a modest apartment building with clean lines and a balcony overlooking a quiet street. I unloaded in the fading light, my arms aching but my steps sure. The place smelled of fresh paint and possibility, its neutral walls a blank canvas I had no urge to fill just yet. I set up the basics, a bed made with my own sheets, books on a shelf, tea in the cupboard, and sat by the window, letting the silence wrap around me like a long-forgotten comfort. They came back on a Wednesday. I knew the day not because they told me, but because the calls began just after noon and didn't stop for hours. First Caleb, his number lighting up my phone like a warning. I let it ring, stirring sugar into coffee I didn't want, staring at the birds on the ledge outside. Then Melina, her name flashing next, followed by texts. "Mom, call us." "What's going on?" I didn't respond. The voicemails piled up, each one a thread pulling at the edges of my resolve. I listened later, in the quiet of evening, my thumb hovering before pressing play. Caleb's voice crackled through the first. "The keys aren't working. Did you change the locks? What's going on?" Confusion laced his words, a hint of annoyance underneath. The second was shorter, harsher. "Lena, this isn't funny. Where's everything? Where are you?" I paused between them, sipping the cold coffee, the apartment's light floors cool under my feet. Melina's message came next, syrupy sweet but sharp. "We're just really worried, okay? Please call us, let us know you're safe." Safe? I smiled at that, a small bitter curve of my lips. For the first time in years, I was. The word echoed in my mind, contrasting with the years I'd felt anything but. Trapped in a home that no longer felt mine, eroded by their casual claims. I thought back to Joanna's office, the coffee in her chipped mug, the way she'd nodded at the deed. "It's yours, Lena," she'd said, her pen flying across the pad as we outlined the trust for the sale proceeds, the updated will excluding them, the contingencies for any legal pushback. Marcus had called that afternoon with a buyer, a quick close in cash to avoid delays. I'd signed digitally from the road, the house transferring hands while I drove toward freedom. More messages arrived, the phone buzzing like an angry bee. "Caleb again. We found the note. I don't know what you think you heard, but you've made a huge mistake. This is our home too, and you had no right to sell it. We're talking to a lawyer. You've really done it this time." His voice strained, anger bubbling over the denial. I saved that one too, adding it to the recording from Paris, a digital archive of their true colors. I didn't cry or rage, I just listened, the apartment's quiet amplifying their panic. The storage unit code was with Joanna. They could retrieve their things if they bothered to ask her. I hadn't left them destitute, just detached. The sale money was in the trust now, safe from their reach, enough for me to start over without the weight of their expectations. That night I made tea. Real tea, hot and steeped properly, and sat on the balcony, the chill air carrying hints of fall. The stars were clearer here, unfiltered by the oak's branches. Memories surfaced unbidden. Paul's laugh in the garden, Caleb's small hand in mine during storms, but they mingled with newer ones. The hallway's cream paint, the nursery suggestion, the overheard words that had finally woken me. "She's a burden," I whispered it to the night, testing its sting. It hurt less now, dulled by distance. I thought of the packing, how I'd cataloged every item, separating mine from theirs with a calm I hadn't felt in years. The truck to storage, the keys left with the note, simple acts that reclaimed what was mine. By morning, the calls had tapered, replaced by a tense silence. I walked the new neighborhood, light jacket against the breeze, discovering a coffee shop with worn tables and a park bench under maples. No one knew me here, no expectations or guilts. I bought a journal, started writing, not about them, but about the small freedoms. Uninterrupted reading, meals eaten slowly, the luxury of saying no to nothing but my own whims. The betrayal still lingered, a shadow, but it didn't define the light. I'd consulted Joanna not just for papers, but for permission to choose myself. And in that choice, I found a quiet power, unstoppable as the grief that had shaped me once before. They demanded a meeting the next day. A text from Caleb, slicing through the quiet morning like a demand I could no longer ignore completely. "Tomorrow, 10 a.m. Cafe on Main. If you don't show, we're coming to your office." I read it over coffee on the balcony, the birds flitting by unconcerned, and set the phone down without replying. The silence I'd cultivated in this new place felt fragile but mine, a shield against their frenzy. I'd finalized the sale days before leaving, Marcus texting confirmation as I packed the last box. The funds wired to the trust Joanna had set up, untouchable by anyone but me. The note I'd left on the counter echoed in my mind. Surprise. A burden did this. Keys beside it, door locked, garage exit a clean break. The drive to Charlottesville had been a blur of highways and half-formed thoughts, the rental waiting like a promise of anonymity. Unloading had taken hours, my arms sore from boxes of photos and books, Paul's chair placed in the living room corner where it caught the afternoon sun. The apartment was simple, light wood floors that didn't creak like the old house, walls bare of memories, a kitchen with appliances that hummed softly without judgment. I made the bed with linens I'd brought, hung a few pictures to ward off the emptiness, but left most walls blank, a deliberate choice to let the space breathe. That first night, sleep came in fits, the unfamiliar sounds of the building settling around me, but by morning, it felt like a beginning rather than an end. I walked the streets, discovering a bakery with fresh scones, a library branch 2 blocks away, small anchors in this uncharted life. The calls had started soon after, as expected, but ignoring them was easier than I'd imagined. Each vibration a reminder of the distance I'd claimed. Caleb's voicemails replayed in my head during those walks, his confusion turning to anger, Melina's feigned worry a thin veil over entitlement. I didn't delete them, I archived them alongside the Paris recording, a collection of evidence that fortified my resolve. This is our home too, he'd said in one, as if repetition made it true. But it wasn't. The deed had been mine, the mortgage paid with my sweat, the walls built around my grief. Joanna had called to check in, her voice calm. The buyer's in, no hitches, storage units paid up. They'll get the code if they ask nicely. I thanked her, hung up, and stared at the journal I'd bought, its pages filling with notes on the quiet joys. Tea savored hot, books read without interruption, the freedom to nap mid-afternoon if I chose. The betrayal still whispered, but in this space, it didn't echo as loudly. More texts came. Melina's now. We need to talk. This affects all of us. I let them sit unread for hours, then glanced without responding, my silence a language they'd never learned. I thought of the packing process, how methodical it had been, separating their clutter from my essentials, the truck rumbling away to storage under a gray sky. I'd prepaid 6 months, a final gesture not of kindness but closure. The house sale had been swift, the realtor's efficiency a balm. Buyers were a young couple starting fresh, unaware of the history they inherited. As I settled into the rental, unpacking a box of Paul's old letters, I felt the weight lift, grain by grain, the erosion reversing. Grief moved differently here, not invasive but receding, leaving room for something new. Evenings brought reflection, sitting by the window with tea, watching the streetlights flicker on. The frantic calls had peaked that first day, tapering to sporadic messages, their panic shifting to demands. I replayed the Paris recording once more, not for pain but clarity. We'll guilt her into it. It stung less now, dulled by action. I'd relocated not in flight but in reclamation. The Charlottesville air crisper, the anonymity a gift. No neighbors knocking with questions, no mail rerouted to others' names. I started a routine, morning walks, afternoon reading, evenings journaling the small victories. The demand for the meeting hung like a cloud, but I decided to go, not out of obligation but to end it on my terms. Tomorrow, the cafe, neutral ground, my recording ready. For now, I savored the silence, the notes echo a quiet triumph in the void they'd created. The apartment's quiet grew familiar, a companion rather than a void. I cooked simple meals, flavors I'd forgotten in years of rushed dinners, and let the days unfold without their shadow. Ignoring the calls wasn't avoidance, it was power, a refusal to fill their emptiness with my explanations. Joanna had warned of possible legal bluster, but the papers were ironclad, no shared title, no claims to stake. As night fell, I sat with the journal, writing, "You chose this space for yourself." The words anchored me, the relocation complete, not just in miles but in mind. Their return had unraveled nothing but their illusions. My departure was silent, but its impact roared in the unanswered rings. I arrived at the cafe at 10:05, not out of rudeness but intention, a small assertion that their schedule no longer dictated mine. The place was familiar, a corner spot on Main, with mismatched chairs and the scent of fresh pastries wafting from the counter. Caleb and Melina were already seated at a back table, postured in practiced indignation, hands curled around untouched mugs of coffee that had gone cold. I didn't greet them. I simply sat, set my phone on the table screen up, and pressed play without a word. Their voices spilled out, familiar and cruel, filling the space between us like smoke. She's a burden. We'll take the master bedroom. Guilt works every time. I watched their faces shift, Caleb's mouth tensing into a line between anger and denial, Melina paling as if the words were strangers, not her own. The recording played on, unhurried, each phrase a nail in the coffin of whatever illusion remained. Caleb shifted in his seat, his eyes flicking to the phone as if he could will it silent. Melina leaned forward slightly, her fingers tightening on her mug, but she said nothing at first. When it ended, the cafe's ambient chatter rushed back in, a stark contrast to the heavy quiet at our table. "You misunderstood," Caleb said flatly, his voice low to avoid drawing eyes from nearby patrons. "No," I answered calmly, meeting his gaze without flinching. I finally understood. The words hung there, simple and irrevocable. Melina tried next, her tone soft but cutting. "You blindsided us. You sold our home out from under us." "It was never yours," I replied, my voice steady as the oak tree's roots I'd left behind. "It was mine, paid for, maintained, protected with years of my life." Caleb scoffed, leaning back in his chair, arms crossing like a barrier. "After everything we've done for you." The accusation landed, but it didn't pierce as it once might have. I met his eyes, saw the boy I'd raised flickering behind the man's defensiveness, and didn't look away. "Yes," I said quietly, "and you taught me exactly what not to become." They didn't know what to do with that. Silence stretched, their indignation cracking under the weight of exposure. I didn't give them time to recover, or spin more excuses. There will be no money, no access to my accounts, no forwarding address, no second chances. Melina opened her mouth, closed it again, her hand fluttering to her throat as if words had deserted her. Caleb's fists clenched on the table, knuckles white against the wood. "I'm your son," he said finally, the title wielded like a weapon, as if it alone should bend me. "And I was your mother," I replied softly, "not your asset." For a long moment we sat in that silence, the kind they'd never learned to live inside, uncomfortable, revealing, without the crutch of manipulation. The cafe bustled around us, laughter from another table, the clink of spoons and cups, life moving on oblivious to our unraveling. I stood then, sliding a small envelope across the table with the storage unit details scribbled inside, the code Joanna had held until now. Their belongings were there, prepaid, a final thread severed cleanly. I turned to leave, my steps measured on the tiled floor, the door's bell chiming behind me like a period at the end of a sentence. Behind me, neither of them called my name. No pleas, no outbursts, just the echo of their own words hanging in the air. Outside, the street felt brighter, the fall air crisp against my skin as I walked back to my car parked a block away. The confrontation hadn't been cathartic in the dramatic sense, no tears, no shouting matches, but it had been final, a door closed with my hand on the knob. I drove back to Charlottesville with the windows down, the wind tousling my hair, carrying away the last wisps of their hold. The rental waited, its neutral walls now feeling like sanctuary rather than exile. I made tea upon arriving, steeping it properly in the quiet kitchen, and sat by the window journaling the encounter. Not with bitterness, but as a milestone. Their faces replayed, the shock, the denial, the unspoken realization that guilt no longer worked. I'd exposed the ledger they'd kept, and in doing so, balanced my own. Evenings like this brought a new rhythm. Reading chapters without haste, walks in the nearby park where leaves were starting to turn, small conversations with strangers at the coffee shop that didn't demand more than a smile. The phone stayed silent after that. No more texts or calls, as if the cafe had drawn a line they couldn't cross. Joanna checked in once, confirming no legal moves on their end. The deed's transfer was clean, the trust secure. I volunteered at the community center sporadically, sitting in circles where stories of loss mirrored mine, offering nods rather than advice. The betrayal faded not into forgiveness but acceptance. A scar that strengthened rather than weakened. In reclaiming my voice at that table, I'd reclaimed everything, the silence now filled with my choices alone. The quiet in my new apartment felt different from the start. Not the aching kind I'd filled with other people's needs for so long, but soft and whole, like a blanket woven from my own threads. I wasn't waiting for knocks or calls or demands anymore. The days unfolded at my pace, simple and unclaimed. Mornings brought tea steeped just right, not the half-cold cups forgotten on counters amid chaos. I sat by the window, watching birds on the ledge, their flutters a gentle reminder that life moved without force. Some days, I didn't speak to anyone, and I liked it that way. The silence a companion, not a void. But I didn't disappear into it entirely. After a few weeks, I found a small community center nearby, hosting weekly groups for grief and boundary setting. It felt strange at first, sitting in a circle of strangers, saying my name aloud like I was starting over. But that's exactly what I was doing. I wasn't there to dwell on Caleb directly, though his shadow lingered in the stories I heard. I talked about the quiet ways we lose ourselves in caring for others, how love can become a cage if we don't guard the door. The women nodded, their eyes holding similar scars, divorces, estranged children, lives poured out without refill. We didn't fix each other. We listened, and that was enough to start mending. One evening, after group, a woman named Sabria pulled me aside. She ran a shelter for single mothers on the edge of town, her voice warm with quiet strength. "We could use someone like you," she said. Not to preach, just to sit with them, tell the truth. So I started showing up, once a week at first, then more, settling on worn couches with young women whose eyes held the same exhaustion I'd known. I listened to their fears, shared pieces of my story, not the bitter edges, but the parts that whispered they weren't alone in the giving and the losing. Afternoons at the shelter became anchors, the laughter of children in the playroom, a balm against the solitude I still cherished. I didn't advise, I let them decide, offering nods and the occasional, "You know your strength better than anyone." It healed me too, this giving without strings, a reclaiming of the mothering I'd once lost to entitlement. Walking home one day, the chill of early fall in the air, I realized I hadn't thought of Caleb in days. Not with pain or anger, just a distant acknowledgement, like a chapter closed in a book I'd outgrown. Not every loss is a wound. Some are the first steps toward something finally yours. A year passed in that quietest way, no dramatic shifts, just steady days stacking into a life that felt honest and unspectacular in the best sense. The anniversary snuck up, marked by the first yellow leaf falling outside my window. Autumn had always been Paul's favorite. Caleb's too when he was little. I'd rake piles just for his jumps and giggles. I made tea that morning, sat at the kitchen table with my journal, no expectations pressing in. I opened to a blank page and wrote a letter, not to them, but to me. You were never a burden. You were the foundation, the one who kept it all from falling apart. You carried what no one saw, gave more than anyone returned. When they reduced you to usefulness, you walked away, not cruelty, but clarity. I signed it simply, no apologies, and felt the words settled deep, a self-affirmation that needed no echo. Later, I took a walk, my feet leading toward the old neighborhood without intent. The street appeared, the house standing familiar but distant, its door painted anew, porch clean under someone else's care. It didn't hurt as I'd feared. I didn't linger or hope for glimpses through windows. I just kept walking, the past a shadow that no longer followed. I didn't lose my son. That truth came slowly, without bitterness. I lost the version I'd clung to, the boy who'd never turn away, the man who'd honor the hands that built his world. What I released wasn't a child, but the illusion that he truly saw me. In the space left behind, I found room for mornings without rush, evenings with books that transported me, connections at the group, and shelter that fed without draining. Sabria invited me to lead a session one day, sharing on boundaries, and I did. My voice steady, the stories weaving hope from hard-won lessons. The apartment evolved too, a plant on the sill, a throw blanket Paul would have liked, small touches that made it mine without the weight of history. Detachment brought peace, not emptiness. I volunteered more, read chapters in sunlight, savored teas from the market down the street. The phone stayed quiet, no bridges rebuilt, and I didn't mind. The void they'd left was filled with my own rhythm. On quiet nights, I'd sit by the window, the birds gone to roost, and whisper thanks for the clarity that came from betrayal. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. a gentle unfolding in the light of choices I'd finally claimed. The days blurred softly after that, each one a gentle brushstroke on a canvas I no longer hurried to fill. Mornings stretched with the sun filtering through curtains I'd chosen for their lightness, tea warming my hands as birds returned to the ledge, their songs a subtle melody of continuance. The community group became a ritual, circles of shared whispers where wounds aired without judgment, healing in the listening more than the words. At the shelter, the young mothers' faces softened over time, their stories mirroring mine in quiet echoes. Sacrifices given freely, only to be met with ingratitude or loss. I sat with them, offering tea and presents, reminding them that strength bloomed in the pauses, in the no's they learned to say. Autumn deepened, leaves carpeting paths I walked daily, the air carrying a crispness that invited reflection without regret. The anniversary passed like a sigh, the letter in my journal a touchstone I revisited on rainy afternoons, its affirmations a soft anchor. I didn't seek news of Caleb or Melina. Their absence was a gift, allowing space for new roots. A book club at the library, a garden plot at the community center where I planted bulbs for spring. The house in Asheville faded to a distant memory, its sale a chapter closed with grace, the proceeds tucked away for days yet to unfold. In this quieter life, I discovered joys long shelved, novels read by lamplight, walks where thoughts wandered freely, connections that asked nothing but reciprocity. Betrayal had been the storm, but what followed was calm, a serenity woven from self-kindness. I was no longer the foundation for others, I was my own steady ground. And as evenings drew in, stars pricking the sky outside my window, I let the peace settle, a whisper of contentment. You've arrived home at last.